welcome to another episode of Put It Together. I'm Daniel G. Garza, your host, and welcome. It is Saturday, June 3rd, 2023. Happy Pride Month to everybody who's watching us, and for all of you in the LGBTQIA community, and for our allies and supporters, thank you for being here. We want to, sorry, always a little bit of technical issues here. There we go. Welcome to the show. We have a really great show for you today. And I know, every episode I say, I'm very exciting and I'm very excited to have my guests, but I always am. I love having my guests and getting to know them a little better, and I hope that you will enjoy the conversation. For everybody watching us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, do us a favor if you don't mind sharing this on your page so that other folks can watch along with you. If you're watching us on YouTube, scroll down, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. It'll let you know every time there's a new show on our page. And remember, we got stuff pretty much every day of the week. On Mondays, you can check out our horoscopes. On Wednesdays, the Christian and Daniel show. On Fridays, it's Zodiacs with my friend Richard Wayne Kilgo II. And then Saturday noons, we're putting together live stream at our regular hour. But remember, sometimes we have pop-up shows during the week. So you want to hit that bell so we'll let you know when we have a new show. Great things happening for those of you. I want to say this before we start. For those of you that wrong button. For those of you that still want to try and make it to the gala tonight, I believe there's still tickets available. Radiant Health Center's gala, Midsummer's Night Dream, is tonight. So I will be there. We will be having a live stream at the beginning and during the presentation. So if you want to be part of that, please join us. Go to radianthealthcenters.org for more information. But I do believe that you can still buy tickets, so make sure you go check that out. Where are we? There I am. So without further, let me bring my guest today, and let me put my glasses on. Let me read you a little bit of her bio. You know what? I was talking to her before the show, and I think I threw myself out because she's so cool. All right. Daniela Velazquez is a first-generation St. Louisian. Her family arrived in St. Louis from New York City, where her parents lived the immigrant experience while being citizens of our country. As a transplant from Puerto Rico to New York and then to St. Louis, her family is a testament to the American dream, and she is proud to be a child of that dream. She learned the power of difference and advocacy at an early age. Being different helped her develop a deep sense of empathy and an ability to understand people. She realized from a young age that all of her heroes were those who didn't quite fit in the mold. Her late brother, who was deaf and legally blind, had an indomitable spirit as he explored the world around him. Her mother, despite her lack of formal education, was a tireless advocate who worked to make streets safer and state policies more effective for those living with disabilities. The New Sixth Ward, which her brother attended, the Missouri School for the Blind, is where she made her home and where she wants to serve. So without further, let me bring Daniela on so she can share more of her story. Hello, Daniela. How are you doing?
I'm well. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor, and I'm excited to have this conversation and figure out how we put it all together. I put it together for this
I feel like it's
episode.
I feel like it's the eternal question, right there with what is the meaning of life and like how we put it together. I like to tell my audiences how I met my guest, and a big shout out to one of my favorite people, and he knows he's one of my favorite people, Byron, who was part of the team that helped us get coordinated at Positively Fearless. He was one. He was a friend. I feel like he had an official title, but he became a friend and a confidant and an ally. And I could go with him for any problems. And he's just a wonderful guy, and I just love him. But you, I'm gonna overstep a little bit. You guys are together, so that's how we met, right?
Yep, I think he's a good guy too. So
he's good to keep around.
he's a keeper. He's a keeper.
Well, I'm very glad that he got to that he introduced us and that you're on the show. I know from going to your website, there's a lot of things on the website that need to be updated to where you are now, and I'm sure you're going to tell us about that in your story. So I'm going to shut up now and just say, Daniela Velazquez, how do you put it together?
I'll put putting it together is an iterative journey. It's a different kind of put it together each level. But so yes, I haven't. I need to update my website. So I am the first Latina to serve on the St. Louis Board of Aldermen, which is our city's legislative body. So it's basically the city council. And I'm the first person of Puerto Rican descent to ever serve there as well. So that in itself has been a journey of um, sort of listening and following the path and thinking, okay, is this the right move? This is my first foray into the official political life. Before that, I've been a communicator, professional communicator for my entire career. I was a journalist. I worked in public relations, and so I worked in advocacy previously for the ACLU of Missouri, and I was a communications and civic engagement contractor for the Ferguson Commission after Michael Brown was killed in St. Louis. So a lot of my different experiences have led me to this moment, which it wasn't one of those pieces where, I thought I was going, if you'd asked me 10 years ago or 5 years ago, it's not what I was planning on doing, but, it was sometimes you have to listen to the voice within or, the spiritual call when it happens. And um, that has been how I've started to put it together. And there's a lot to learn as a first year, as a freshman elected. Certainly in St. Louis, we are undergoing, I'd say, pretty critical time of transformation in both kind of addressing where we've come from as, community and a city and where we want to go. And so, being able to be a part of that and also representing my community, my Latino community, has been a big part of that.
So for people that don't know St. Louis and the diversity, or how is the Latino representation there? Like, is there a big number? Are there a lot of people out there doing the work?
Yeah, I mean, so we're pretty small, and you think and we're small but mighty, I would say. But I mean, compared to like other cities, like Chicago, like Los Angeles, New York, we've got about 6% across the metropolitan region. So St. Louis, the region is about 1.5 million people. St. Louis City is about 300,000 proper, but it's still about that same 6%. We're all spread out, and you've got somebody from everywhere. So there are, everybody's represented, but there's not like, even if you see across the state in Kansas City, we don't have that same sort of deep historic neighborhood that you do in other places, which makes it a little bit more challenging to be heard, to be seen, to be, to be at the table.
Gotcha. Yeah, because like for instance, I live in Laguna Beach, here in Laguna Beach too. It's surprising when people say I'm the first Latino in the area, because you go up to LA, which is just an hour away, and the Latino community is so well represented. It's Did it surprise you that you were the first Latina or Latinx to
I
put?
mean, yeah, I mean, and so yeah, I mean, it did. I mean, that wasn't, I mean, it was part of, how do I say this? It wasn't part of the design, that I was running, that I'm going to be, okay, this is there was a need, and there was, I think my friends in the community, we've been talking about political power and representation and how do you do it. And so when things kind of shifted and I saw there was an opportunity to run, um, I was going to run. I was like, is this the right move for me? And then the thought was, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? So yeah, it did surprise me, and it did surprise me. Like, I should send you a picture, but I put I got a little Puerto Rican flag that I put on my desk on the chambers, on the floor,
Yeah,
just to have it. And it's never been there. And I've sent it to a couple other people who are Puerto Rican, but like, it's never been there. And it was really important to me to do that from the beginning. So, and it also was important to me, even though we are, that 6%, that I run a campaign on who I am. And that is a part of my Latinidad, right? Or like, it is a part of my life. Latinidad is a part of my life. And so, even on the website and the campaign logo, we put, Spanish, like the candidata por distrito seis, even though like it's the sixth ward, that's how we talk about it. Um, because I wanted it to be clear that, that was going to be a part of me. And I, even though Missouri's conservative, I live in a very progressive part of the city, and the city is overall, it's kind of a blue island in a sea of red, if you will, in Missouri. Um, so people, I mean, it resonated with people, but it was important for me to like put it out front and center, and I was proud of it, and I also didn't want to hide it. I wanted to make it a point that, if I can win with the Spanish, even though Spanish isn't spoken here.
Yeah.
And I had a few people, when I was knocking doors, like see it, and they were excited. One guy's like, my wife is from Mexico. We saw it on your sign. We didn't know anything about you, but we wanted to vote for you because of that. So I felt pretty strongly about, not only is it who I am, but making sure that it showed up in my values, right?
Yeah. It makes a difference. I two things to what you're just saying. I was fortunate to be with Radiant Health Centers. I belong to a board of directors here, and we were at AIDS Watch in DC about 2 months ago, and we had a chance to go through the Capitol and visit some of our representatives. And it was really cool to me that although our representatives didn't do it, but as I was walking around and I could see through doors, and I saw a Mexican flag, and I was born in Monterrey, Mexico, and I saw and it just kind of like, it was like that little bit of like, oh, that's what I needed, like that booster energy, like to know that there was another Mexican in the building. I mean, I knew there were others, but to know that there was another Mexican building and that they were representing gave me the energy that I needed to go, okay, I need to represent you. And one thing that I've done for several years when I'm at meetings, um, is when I start my conversation, I always start with buenos dias or buenas tardes. Like when it's my time to share, I always greet everybody in Spanish. And that immediately people just turn to you like, whoa, where did that come from? Because I think there is a connection. We want that connection. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I think too, like, I mean, I think part of my journey and putting it together, if you will, I mean, has been, exploring like what that means, and how I show up. And I think that, speaking, of course, just for me, a lot of times I describe myself as a diasporican. I did not make up that word. I actually found that out just a few years ago. I was like, yeah, that totally makes sense. Um, but I think people, and I think you can have the diasporas across, across Latino America, or Latines. But there's this thing where it's like, how do we, not just how do we show up, but I think our legitimacy is often challenged, right? Like if you don't sound what somebody thinks you should sound, the way that somebody thinks you should sound, whether that's from the Latina community or from, the non-Latina community. It's like, well, you don't sound Hispanic enough. How come you don't have an accent? And my joke would always be like, am I supposed to sound like, J Lo? Like, am I supposed to sound like my parents do? Because they're from Brooklyn. They grew up in Brooklyn, so they have the New Eureka accent. But I'm like, am I supposed to sound like that? Am I, So I think for me, part of it was really reclaiming and understanding how, what it meant to me and how I showed up. So like, I don't know if you know this, but like I lived in Mexico City a couple years ago for like 5.5 months.
Oh, wow.
I called it my adult study abroad. But I was there, and they were like, sometimes people were confused with like, but you're Puerto Rican from the US and you're here in Mexico and you don't have family. And I wanted to go, and I had a really strong feeling that that's where I wanted to go, partially to learn Spanish, partially to get immersed in a different culture and go away, like leave, take some time away from the US. But like I did that, and I became more comfortable with like how I show up in my culture, which means like sometimes I use Spanish. I mean, sometimes Spanish is, it's my second language, and I'm still learning. So like I love novelas, but like sometimes it takes me, some things aren't as, because it is my second language. I mean, it, I have to work at it still. But I'm like, but when I was younger, that made me really uncomfortable. And as I got older, like I'm like, it's okay. And it's okay if I have this piece, like you said, in Spanish, or I have these pieces that may not be the whole thing, but they're part of the thing, but they're me. And and it's how I define it. But that took me, like, that was part of my journey was, you know, leaving and going to Mexico for a while and kind of understanding that piece of it. So I appreciate that you say buenos dias and buenos tardes, and bring it, because I think it does make a difference, and people do. It does resonate with people in a different, a different way.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you in that we moved to the States when I was 3 years old. So I grew up Americanized per se. Like everything was from school and the babysitter and the people I hung out with. I mean, even at 3 years old, I was a babysitter, but everybody spoke English. Everybody around me. So when people talk about, it's like, what's your first language? I'm like, Spanglish is my first language. And they're like, but they're like, that's not real. I'm like, it is when you live in Texas, and if you live in a border town, it's a very real. So Spanglish is my first language, and then depending on the need, I can be either more American or more Mexican. I have the ability to balance that and fit into different spaces that I need to and adjust. I feel like we're like Jello. We can mold into whatever we need to, and and I would say this, fit into the mold that we need to so that people can enjoy it better. And does that
Mm.
make sense?
No, I think it's a beautiful way to look at it. I mean, I think sometimes code switching, right? A lot of times you call it. I like the idea of like flowing and being fluid and being like more like Jello. Can have a negative connotation, but I also feel like it does allow people to connect. And I never feel there are moments where I rarely feel inauthentic. Like, I'm just like, oh, but like when I'm with a certain group of people, it allows that part of me or that moment like to come out or um and so no, I really like how you described it.
Yeah. To finish this part of the question, when I was in business school, my typing teacher, I went back to school in Mexico. I did high school in Mexico, and when I came back, my accent was a little harsher. And when I was in business school, she said, I think it would help you to take some diction classes to help you. This isn't, by the way, this is 1990. And she was like, it would help you in business so you can be taken more serious. And I listened to her. So I went and did like 2 months of Peter Piper picks a pickle pepper. And just to get the diction right, which I would say now in acting, it kind of helps you sometimes. But every once in a while, I manage to go when I go back to Texas and I'm with my people, and everything just like falls, and I'm like, "Ooh, I'm back to me, and this is so cool to be me again." So congratulations on that. I'm glad that people get to see Daniela Velazquez as it is, and not Daniela Velazquez. And if that makes sense, like to
Oh
see.
no, I mean, and it's wild. Like my name has been misspelled in every paper. And I had to recorrect it. I didn't get the accent on my ballot. I have it on the cards. Like people are still learning how to pronounce my name and the way that I pronounce it because I say I do say I say Daniela Velasquez, and like I remember going through this whole thing, and I didn't take a diction class. Maybe I should have taken one too. When I was growing up, as being like, well, I don't want to say like Velasquez, even though that's around it, but I'm like, I don't speak Spanish, so it's hard for me to. And like Puerto Rican Spanish is a little bit different than Mexican Spanish. So like in Puerto Rico and I can't even say it right. Puerto Rico, they say like Velasquez, right? So I'm like, well, that's not really how I'd say my last name either. So I sort of settled for this. Like, I'm gonna say it the V like English, va, and then the skez like Spanish. And then and then sometimes I tell people the story and they're like, that's a lot of thinking. I'm like, well, welcome to like living in you know, a
Yeah.
a bicultural existence where you have to be forced to you have to come to grips with how you think about these things because other people are going to do it for you, so you might as well think it through.
Yeah, so yeah, that's why I always say I'm Daniel G. Garza, and always make sure that the Garza is pronounced in Spanish.
Garza.
Garza. Plus, I love to roll my R's, so there's always like 20 R's in there. So moving on to another part, I'm really curious. Like, can you take us a little bit um, from the moment that you like wherever you were like, I'm running, I'm running. I want to be in politics, and how did being Latina, being a female, did that all work into it? And then additional question: how was the ripple effect for the people around you? How did were they involved or encouraging?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it was like I think the putting it together was like it was an iterative journey, right? So Um, Probably back in I was at the ACLU of Missouri from 2016 to 2019. So right in the middle of there, and I was director of communications. So we started right before Trump got elected. The organization, obviously, though, I mean, it is a pivotal organization, but that was a really critical time. It was probably one of the busiest times in the ACLU's, you know, decades long history. And so I've been kind of what I would say described as politically adjacent, right? Like I knew like we had a policy director, I would communicate about policy issues, but I wasn't, totally in the thick of everything happening in the state legislature, but I knew about it. I knew some backstory, I don't, all the stuff. Um, and I kind of came to a dilemma of what I was thinking like, well, maybe I should run. What's the best fit for me? And that was probably back in 20, it was probably 2017. And I had talked to my pastor at the time and, I was like, I don't know, like how best can I what should I do? And he's like, well, just think about what impact you're going to have, like where you're going to have the greatest impact, like where you can make the biggest difference. And I thought about it, I explored, I talked to my older person at the time as I was really interested in running. I was thinking about the state and I just like I dropped a seed, kind of like, well, maybe I'm interested. And then I thought about what my pastor said. And I was like, you know what? I'm doing really good work at the ACLU. Um, I can do better here than I can running. So this is what I'm going to do. So then, and I stopped that. I had transitioned out of advocacy into more straightforward public relations. I work for a couple agencies. And I kind of put that behind me, went to Mexico, like I said, thought, well, okay, well, maybe I'm doing kind of global things. That's the next journey, that's the next adventure. And then kind of all of a sudden my older person that I talked to a few years ago, um, reached out to me out of the blue and said hey, I'm not running. Do you still live in the area? Would you be interested in running? I just keep thinking about you as the person. Right. And that was the same expression I had because we hadn't talked in a couple years. I was 6 months back from Mexico City. And I was like, okay, wow, I did not think this was the next chapter. But I thought about it and that question, I said those questions, if not now, then when? Because I don't know if there's ever a perfect alignment in life, right? I'd had this, great job, I'd had this great experience, but also like if there were a time to start or to run, this would be it. And then, like I mentioned, like we've been talking about the community just because the way Latinos or Latinas are in the community, there's not necessarily a centralized, neighborhood or area that they're in. So it's hard to be represented, right? Because our our population is kind of diffused throughout the region. So I'm like, okay, well, man, if I do this, I'm pretty sure I can do this. Like I think I'll win if I decide to do it. And that means something too, right? Like I'm not like um I believe in taking risks, but I also believe in thinking them through. So, I mean, it was not a decision I took lightly. I was like, I'm going to upend my entire life to do this if I try. So, if I do it, I want to do a good job and I want to win. um, so I mean, that was kind of where it started. So I thought about it and I was like, okay, well, like this is the moment because I'd had those seeds, I planted that seed years before and it was like, oh, well, I guess I did kind of do this. It's just, it grew in a way that I wasn't expecting. And I thought that running for office might be something for me generally, like just with like who I am as a person. Like I thought it maybe like it wasn't outside of the realm of possibility. It just I was not planning it then in that moment, but that moment was, the moment I needed to do it. So I did. And then with the community, I mean, it was really great. Like part of what we wanted to do and part of what I wanted to do was really, even though I am a representative of a district in the city, is really have a moment to unite some of the Latinos, Latinas across the region because we hadn't had somebody represent us. There was one person in the state house that was like that would host sort of the Hispanic Capital Day, and there was somebody at the board previously, but they didn't quite embrace the culture as much as I did. So I was like, well, this is important not just for me, but for all these other people around me. So we talked about during the campaign um, was being the first but not the last. And so that really resonated with a lot of Latines. Like I had a fundraiser that was mostly hosted by queer Latines in the city. Some of them who are in my ward, which is amazing. And they're all people who didn't see themselves, who hadn't seen themselves being able to run until I ran, which is pretty powerful because, I mean,
Yeah.
I wasn't not doing it for them, but I was also like, it's different when you see, you're trying to make you're focused on your part of it, and then people say that they inspire you. I mean, I still can't, I don't really understand. I'm appreciative, but I was like, I'm just trying to make my way in this world and win this race. Like,
Well, you're kind of confirming what I tell people in my coaching practice is first you got to do it for you. Like first you got to find your power. Like this is my power. I'm committed that I'm going to do this for myself. And when you're truly honest about doing it for yourself, then people will follow that, and you're giving them the permission to follow their own power. Like, let me do this for me first, which actually leads to our first question. We have a question on the board for you, which kind of segues perfectly into this part of the conversation. It says, what was the source of your belief in yourself, and what is the source of this power?
that is a deep question, Christian. I think, I've always been a spiritual person, for sure. And I think I believe that, we walk on the shoulders of our ancestors that came before us. And so, seeing people and having people support me, because I will tell you that, yes, when I believed it, I was like, oh, this was a great idea. I'm going to do it. And then I actually did it. It was much harder. Once I got into it, I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of hard. And at those moments, I mean, people really came out. I mean, um, I had one volunteer who I'd never met who volunteered for another local campaign, and he was with me. He knocked, and we campaigned during the winter, so we were knocking doors from like January through April. Just, I mean, I know. And we started knocking halfway through the January. He knocked doors except for the 1 week he took vacation every week, and I didn't know him before this. Um, and there are people who, sent out emails to, like, you know, hundreds of people to get them to donate or show up at an event. And you can't knock thousands of doors by yourself. You try and knock as many as you can, of course, but like there are things that are like you have to have people with you. So I think the combination of, the source, for me was, okay, am I listening to the intuition? Am I listening to the other pieces of my life, the other things that brought me here, like my ancestors and like, spirit, divinity, that like, okay, you have your purpose. This is part of your purpose. You're going to listen and you're going to ignore it. And then once kind of having that emotion, really having people go to bat for me that I didn't even know that they were doing that or if they didn't have to. And I think those things were just really humbling. Like people picking up signs, putting up signs, like getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to put signs up with on election day. And I mean, just, I can't tell you, I had one person who he texted me and he's like, I want to be your yard sign captain. I'm like, what does that mean? But he had a spreadsheet and we gave us from somebody else who, he had a spreadsheet of somebody else who ran for something, who potential supporters of mine, and then took the list that we had and like would go and drive around town, like put up hundreds of yard signs, tens of yard signs. I mean, we had hundreds. So I mean, but I didn't know this guy either before we started, and I did not say I might need a yard sign captain. Like, but it's pretty amazing that people will do those things for you. So I think that also, I wouldn't say the belief in myself, but just that, like, when things are in alignment, sometimes that you kind of see, okay, like there's some force beyond what I can see that's sort of helping me move these things along.
Good. I want to remind everybody who's watching us today, we are speaking with Alderwoman Daniela Velazquez. If you have any questions or comments for her, please put them in whatever site you're watching us, whatever page you're watching us. If you're watching this on a replay, still ask your question, make your comments, and I'll make sure to get them to her. We have another question for you on the board. As an alderwoman, is your life now under a microscope? If yes, how do you find the balance with this type of scrutiny in your public and personal life?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, there's no simple answer, but the clear answer is like once you move into elected life, I mean, you are a public figure, and that's what I say. This not from a clinical like I was a journalist. I have, I mean, these things like there's a different definition. So I mean, yes, people should ask questions that you your life is naturally. It's more because you are a public figure. There are things that the public has a right to know that you don't have to have when you're a private citizen, and that's like legally and with expectations. And sometimes that's hard. So I think I mean, I try and um, have a private life. I'm aware that people are are watching. I mean, which is a good and a bad thing, right? I mean, it's good for attention, like for a public, political career, but also, um, you know, things can be taken out of context if you're not, aware. And emails are sunshineable, so people can see an email that we send, and that's just part of it. So I just try and be thoughtful, even more thoughtful than that. And then, yeah, I mean, there's some things that are, um, I probably don't post everything in the way that I would have 10 years ago on social media. I just don't. And that's okay. So it is finding that balance. And then just, I mean, I think it's um, kind of, I think I believe in purpose and living a purposeful life. So I don't want things that to distract people from like that purpose. Right.
Yeah.
And certainly like, you know, I don't want to say a scandal, but like, whatever I drank at this place in this setting, like, shouldn't override the fact, shouldn't supersede like the real work. And so
And,
I'm thoughtful about that.
and we see it in the big arenas, political arenas, that everything, everything is up for dissection. Everything people do, everything they say. And I think as citizens who are not in the political world, we we want to hold our leaders to some standard and some expectations. I believe that sometimes they're unrealistic. Like you're still human, you still deserve a relationship. It's not like all of a sudden you're going to be in a glass chamber where you don't get to do anything with your life. But I think it's unfair. But like you say, it's also. I'll ask this question: did you know the level of or the amount of eyes that would be on you as you were coming into this?
Um, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think yes in the sense, like I said, like I was a reporter, I was a journalist.
Hmm.
I'm passionate about part of my campaign was talking about transparency anyway. Um, and I've done sunshine law requests when I was a reporter. As a government consultant, I've had to, you know, redact things to give out to reporters. So like, and I understood that the difference, right? Like I never expected like once I ran to be that things would be the same or like once I was elected, right? Because even when you run, you're still really putting yourself out as a public figure. I think the thing is like in daily practice thinking about, okay, well, I need to be really clear in how I communicate,
Yeah.
because things can be taken out of context. And so thinking about that every day, even when you're sending a note. I mean, it's a lot. But I mean, I think it's part of the job. And I mean, I think it's, good practice, to just to always be aware. Like again, I'm sure not everybody's gonna sunshine all these or put a request and want to see every email I sent out. But also like, did you really mean to say that? Are you saying it like you wanted to say, I mean, it's just being aware of what you're trying to, like what you're trying to accomplish in that moment. So it kind of keeps you sharp.
I was gonna say, I think it's because okay, so I'm not at your space of public, but with our production company, the amount of live streams that I do and presentations and campaigns that I'm part of, there's always that little clause. It's like, hey, keep it clean, make sure you keep. But I really, where some people that I know have taken it from the, oh my God, they're watching everything I do. I decided that I'm going to take that as watching myself in everything I do. Make sure that I'm not sunshine optimistic. I'm not always in a positive mood, but I want to make sure that the message that I put out meant from me, talking about the power that I have is to be able to put out positive messages or solution based messages, or let's come together versus let's fall apart messages. And it's a really, I believe it's a really good mindful practice every day. It's like, okay, this is a tough situation. I'm having an argument with this person. This is not the way that I want to be seen. How can I adjust my way of thinking, not just the way that I'm acting, or the message I put out, but how can I really change the way that I act and think so that my message aligns with myself? Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally makes sense. I mean, it totally makes sense, and I think that that's part of um, good communication. Like first of all, but also, I mean, um, how do I say this? Like I believe, I mean, um, if the goal is to reach people, then it's like reaching them where, I mean, that's kind of like where they're at, right? Maybe that seems cliche, but like if you do something, if you or I get into, a conversation like, and I know that it's going to turn off the person, they're going to get defensive, then they're not going to hear me, so it's not really, so I mean, I could do the thing that I could react in the way they want me to react, but if my goal is to actually get them to listen, then it's kind of my responsibility to adjust. And maybe like, do they not have, a conversation is two ways, right? But I mean, if I understand and I see it, right, then I think it is sort of my responsibility. Like, if I can adjust to the situation, it's kind of back to that code switching thing, right? And the being jello and being fluid, right? Like, it's like, if my goal is to communicate and to get people to think differently or to change minds and hearts, then me going in solely with what I think is right is probably not going to do that. So how can I adjust to facilitate the dialogue or whatever? And you just made me think, and I'll say this, like one of my favorite quotes. It's not quite the same thing, but I think just describing how you described it is, "You are the better keep yourself bright and clean because you are the window through which you see the world."
Yeah,
Um,
that's very
and
good.
it and it's, I think George Bernard Shaw said that, and like that's just what I think. Like no matter what, I mean, I view things through the prism of me, but like if I'm foggy or if I'm unclear, if I'm, it all comes through, right? Like all my actions come through that.
Yeah.
So, you know, I should be trying to keep things clean, not because I have to, but because like that's the way I want to live my life.
Yep. I believe in, speaking of the Positively Fearless campaign, when the first time that we got together and we're about to do our first photo shoot and get prepared for the launch of the website and such, I told the group when we were together, I was like, we're about to step into a higher platform, and now we're the mirrors to our community. Our community is going to be looking at us to see who they can associate with, who represents them, so they can follow your message. So we have to be very careful about what is your message. Be very clear with yourself. This is who I am. This is what I represent, and this is what I want to do. Because somebody's going to be looking at us and going, "Oh, there's Daniel G. Garza, Latino, gay, HIV positive. Like, what is he doing to get to where he is, and how can I get there myself?" Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think, the flip side of that, and I think, I think we make an assumption that we kind of have a shared sort of perspective on life, but I think the other part of that is, I think when you're doing something different and you're Latina or you're a person of color or you're, queer and there aren't, you're already facing in the public's mind, right? Depending on who your audience is,
Yeah.
a bunch of stereotypes against you, right? Or a bunch of stereotypes to the that counteract who you are or that people have in mind, right? That are not true. And so, and it double like I think it's sort of the burden, and I don't want to go back because I feel like I want to quote a college thing about the burden of being upright and Du Bois. But like we sure that's extra pressure, right? Like not only do you have to kind of go into everything, but people are already going to be thinking, oh, well, you're this, so you must be this. Or I remember, so I grew up in St. Louis. I grew up in St. Louis. Both my parents were born in, in Puerto Rico. My mom moved to Brooklyn when she was 3. My dad moved when he was 12. He didn't learn English till he was 12. Um, and so I have experience, but I sound like I sound, and I grew up in a mostly white, community. Um, and so people will be like, "Well, where are you from?" And then I tell them, they'd be confused. Or I'd see, when I was in journalism, they'd see my name, and I always, I try to have the accent, but they'd be like, "Oh, well, you speak really good English," and I'm like, well, I mean, I should because like I'm a professional journalist, like doing a professional thing. But just I mean, things like I remember I was living in Florida and I was trying to get a new apartment, and the person I was talking to on the phone, asked me if I had a green card. And just based on my name, right? Like nothing like, and so I mean, just all these things sort of, and I don't believe in. I talked about my journey because I don't believe in not acknowledging that those things are real, and that those perceptions exist doesn't mean that they're real. But I also know that like sometimes when in the process for me, like trying to get clear about who I am and how I fit into things, how sometimes I'm like, well, am I that? Or because I'm this, does this mean this? And so, and it's not to be that we have to be better just to be seen as equal, although sometimes that is true. But I think you just kind of have to be aware of it. Like, we're we want to set a different example, or we want to be seen for the different example that we already are, is probably more accurate, right? Because there are probably other people like you, that share some things that, that also exist, but we're just not highlighted in the same way that people from other backgrounds are, because these stereotypes exist.
And then there's before I move on, we have another question on the board. Um, Being the first in anything that you do, I always feel like it's digging a tunnel with a spoon. Like you know you're gonna get there, you know you're gonna make it, but there's so many roadblocks in front because nobody has walked that path. You're basically breaking down the bushes to lay the cement or the roadway to get where you want to go. And it's like, because there is no book that tells you, oh, well, you're the first one to do this, here's what you need to do. You're kind of writing your story as you go along and juggling everything. So I applaud you. I think that I'm so excited that you're on the show and sharing your story to let people know that don't let being the first scare you away, but use it as an incentive to open those doors because somebody behind you is looking. and and it doesn't mean that your version will stay forever. It just means that you're laying down the foundation for other people to grow on that, and that's super exciting. So I'm so glad. I'm so happy for you. I have another question on the board for you. There we go. Have you found it challenging to stick to your platform? And do you feel it is possible to stay true to one's platform without sacrificing internal relationships within the political arena? Two big loaded questions there for you.
Hmm. Well, I mean, so admittedly, I've only been in office about 2 months. So I think it's been okay to stick to my platform. I mean, the without getting too much into it, the where we are to really things are more possible with the way the new board of aldermen is than it was 2 years ago and than it was 5 years ago. So I do believe that there's a group of us who want to see positive change, and change in a way that legit wouldn't have been things wouldn't have been able to get passed 2 years ago because of the makeup of the board. So I don't find it challenging in that way. I mean, I think it's always, I think what veteran legislators would tell you is that good legislation requires compromise, which is hard because I was on the advocacy side, and that is not necessarily the same sort of thinking. But I do think it is possible to stay true to some of those things. I think the other thing about platform and about life is that, the more you learn, the possibilities for different decisions, right? So there are things that I might have said, "Okay, this sounds like a great idea." Then I actually learned more. It's like, "Oh, well, this maybe isn't the right approach because now I have more information." Um, and I think too with like, I think that there's a way to stay true to yourself. I think it goes back to that thing that Danielle that you were saying about being centered. I think that that's a big part of it. Um, because you have to have some clarity amidst the chaos, right? Um, and so the only way to do that, I think, is to be grounded with yourself. Those are great questions, though.
I want to thank Christian for joining. Christian is the director of the program, so he's making sure we have some good questions. When I forget, I get caught up in the conversation. Um, this is the part of the show where we ask our guests to share some words of wisdom with our audience. Daniela Velazquez, what words of wisdom do you have for us?
Um, Great question. So I'd say part of it is staying true to yourself. I know that's cliche, but it's not cliche because it's easy advice, hard to do. And to listen to the voice that's within. Um, there's this quote I love, and it's from Jay-Z, and it's like probably like 15 years old, and it's like, I will not say the F word, but it's like, screw perception, go with what makes sense. And I think it's one of those things that sort of like I live by because sometimes things make sense on the inside, but they don't make sense on the outside. Like even like when I, you know, decided to run, I was also going to be walking away from a really good position that I had and a, great job that I love too. And some people are like, why are you going to do that to like, do this? And so, it's kind of about what makes sense for yourself, even though people may have, it may not seem to make sense on the outside, but it makes sense on the inside. Um, yeah. And then I'd say too, like, um, I think the other big change for me has just been really connecting with the spiritual side of myself that keeps me grounded. And also, like, paying homage and listening to the people who brought me here, like the people who aren't here today, like my grandma, like my brother. But also that sense of like, you go back to the history and you go back to a place like, you know, Puerto Rico and like we haven't been represented. We're actually kind of still a colony. Like there's lots of things around it, right? But I mean my ancestors worked hard to give me the life that I have here, right? And through their hard work and sacrifice, I have options and I, have an ability to make different decisions and also to make a difference. Um, and so I'd say like connect with your ancestors, listen to them, and there are lots of different ways to do that, across cultures. Um, but even just, I think that that's important. Like, really, who are the people that came before you to help you get here?
Yeah, yeah. It's. I always think about my mom having left Mexico and coming to the States, and like all I remember, not all I remember, but in this environment, all I remember is her working. She worked from the time I was a baby and just kept working, and I just keep fighting for what she wanted. And then eventually she had her retirement home set up in Mexico, and she got to go and live in this ranch that she loved. And I'm like, I I have to do my best to grow on that. And she laid. I'm gonna say this: nobody knows what's in our foundation but us, and
Mm,
where that drive comes up. What people get to see is the walls that we build and the ceiling that we have. But that's the beautiful thing about our own foundation is that we can keep adding to it, and that ceiling can keep getting higher and higher. And so, I mean, it's really cool to see somebody like you and go, you know what? I'm just gonna do it. Like I'm just gonna do it, and whatever happens. And people may call me crazy and be like, "How are you?" But that's a Latino way of thinking, Latinx way of thinking. Si ya tienes, if you already have this, why are you gonna let it go? And we're like, because I do believe that there's greener pastures to find. And so I don't know how that makes sense, but
no, it totally does. I mean, I think so too, and I think that that's. I mean, I don't want to. What I'd say is sometimes too that the fear that we have culturally I would say, is a byproduct of our history, right? And so, like, we have this mindset sometimes because they've struggled so much to get to where they are because they did experience colonization, because they did experience oppression, because they did experience, the worst of like what happens like when with like, I'd say machismo and patriarchy, right? And those things are very real and they want you to be safe, and sometimes excelling requires risk, right? And what I always understood is like, I mean, because my parents, they've been supportive and they love me, but I mean, they definitely have not understood all the decisions I've made. Because they're like, why would you give up a great job? Like, why would you like, why would you do these things? And they're still proud, right? They're still very proud, but they don't quite understand. And I think sometimes that's because of not just, I mean, it's embedded in the culture, that history has been embedded in the culture, right? So, I mean, part of, I think, it goes back to, I believe that like, that real liberation starts from within, right? Like if you don't feel free, and if you're not free, how are you going to free other people, and how are you going to sustain it? So it's like, and that's teaching people, right? Like that's teaching me, like there's still some places where, I've got to work on liberation in my own life, but you know, I think that that is the root of it, right? Like part of the fear and oppression is because people haven't experienced that kind of liberation.
I'm right there with you. I think sometimes I know my family and friends in Mexico that when I went to school with them, they're like, why? Like, why are you? And you're like, and I'm sometimes like, I know you don't understand why I'm laying this foundation, but when I start building up, you'll see it. Just trust the process. Trust the process. But I do believe in, and this comes to what Christian said just now, like continued success in your elder womanship. Um, like we just want I don't expect everybody to understand what I'm doing. Just don't bring me down. If you're not going to support me, don't bring me down. Just let me continue my path. Which leads me to one of my final questions. More aspirations. I mean, I know you're still new to this position, but is there ideas in the future of going higher?
Yeah, I mean, I want to see where the path takes me. I mean, and I think one of the things that I want to do is continue to, and I've got plans. We haven't, put everything together. But to help people who are the first and who want to be the first, but not the last. So I mean, for me, like continuing to help people who want to run, who may be the first in their communities to run, is important to build that pipeline, which I think I'd say we've had a hard time building in Missouri too. Um, and to just continue to like be a voice. So I don't know what the future holds. Right now I'm focused on not just doing the things, but like really thinking like what are the places and what are the ways that I can make a difference and change things. And then, life has a way of presenting other opportunities. So, we'll see what happens.
Once you open that door, the universe has paths for us. And I always tell people, I was raised Catholic, so my God, I always believe that my God puts doors for me, and He's like, "Orale, walk through it." And then the universe is like, "Here's the path." And at 52, I've stopped asking where is it going because the universe never answers anyway. She's like,
Right.
"Trust me, trust me, and go." So I wish that for you, that the path that you're on leads you to some wonderful and amazing things. And we want to be part of it. So anytime something happens, please come back and join us and let us know. Here's your website. What can people check out? What can they find on your website?
Yeah, so we do need to do some updating, but you can find our Instagram page, which probably has the most up-to-date pieces. You can sign up for our newsletter on our website. So I've been putting out a newsletter like almost bi-weekly, and we'll continue to do that. And then I think just stay tuned for some of the ideas. I mean, like I said, we're going through a really exciting transformation in the city of St. Louis. I'll be bringing a legislative aid on board probably in a month and a half. And I'm super excited and about that, and that will help us reach the community and hopefully the Latina community a little bit more. Um, yeah, and then hopefully I'll be introducing some bills in the next um, few weeks, and we have a little bit of break, but I mean, I anticipate I'll be introducing some legislation in the month, next few months. So I'm excited about that too.
Nice. So here is a website. Make sure you go check her out. There's a lot of information. I went through it. There's a lot of very personal, a lot of very professional stuff. So you'll have a good time looking through it. Here is the Instagram page. So make sure you go check her out on Instagram. Follow her, support her. That you can add comments there. So make sure if you have any more questions. And again, if you're watching this live, if you we still have a couple of minutes for questions. But if you're watching this on replay and you have any questions, maybe you out there wants to get into politics and don't know what the steps are. We didn't get so much into that part, but if you have questions like, hey, I really want to do this in my area, and maybe you are a Latinx female, and you're like, apoyo, how do I start? Reach out. Maybe I'm sure she'll be happy to share information with you folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the organizations that helped me, and it was sort of random but super important in the timing, is there's an organization called Latinas Represent. And I think they're based out of DC, but I ended up doing a master class with them right after I filed, a few weeks after I filed to run for office. And I got to connect with a couple of councilwomen who are Latinas from Boston, somebody from New York, Miami. So I am connected with that organization, but will be happy to help. Because there are a lot of things, and there's some things that you don't know till you experience it, and but it's good to see people, that was a moment where I saw myself in other people, and I hadn't experienced that before.
So here's that website to them, latinasrepresent.org. Remember .org. Go check them out. Daniela for St. Louis, STL.com.
Yep.
And then follow her on her Instagram. Any last thoughts, any last comments before we leave?
No, I mean, just thank you for having me here, and thank you for following your own path, and your own heart. And yeah, I mean, I encourage everybody to do the same thing, even though you don't know where it will lead. It will at least feel right and authentic to you.
Thank you. All right. Well, I'm going to put you in the green room for a little bit, and I'll come back for you in just a second. But thank you again so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
All right, for everybody watching, thank you so much for being. I hope this inspires you to like follow your dream. It doesn't have to be political. It can be in any field, but just follow it. You just never know. And sometimes that leap of faith is going to lead you to such great things. Don't forget where you come from. Don't forget what you know, because I can assure you that the things that I've learned from my past, the careers that I've had, have definitely helped me where I am today. So done it. Some news here. Remember, we've got Grumpy Bunny in the College Game. $25 signed and delivered. So go to Little Mexican Productions .com/Grumpy Bunny to get your own book. Estamos en inglés y en español, and I will sign them for you guys. Also, my coaching program, The Alignment. So we're identifying, acknowledging, and removing barriers. And we've got one-on-one, we got groups, team building exercises, workshops in person or virtual. So make sure that you message me, whatever your group you are. The webpage is coming. I assure you it's coming. But if you are interested in a transpersonal coaching session, get in touch with me, whatever page you're on. And tonight I will be at Radiant Health Center's gala. It's the Midsummer's Night Dream. It starts at 6 o'clock. If you are going to be there, make sure you come up to me. I'll be interviewing people. I will be live streaming starting at 5 p.m. through 7. And then we'll be showing later the presentation and the award part. So I've also got some candles coming out. Remember, we talked about these on the Christian and Danny show. Martha and I, we made candles. Those will be up for sale soon. So make sure that you follow those. And we'll be back soon with Richard Wayne Kirgo with Zodiacs. We'll be off for the next couple of weeks as I'll be traveling. But if you're, I still forgot to put the number on there. But if you're interested, go follow Wayne for a private reading. Go check him out at his Instagram page. I apologize to Wayne. I still forgot to put the last 4 numbers on his where to call for an appointment. But reach out to him on Instagram, and he will be happy to set up an appointment for you. For now, I want to thank you all for joining us. Thank Daniela Velazquez for being on the show, and we'll see you next time. Hey, put it together. See you later.